All right, what's up? It's Otis Funkmeyer. I'm here live with Andrew McFarlane, and I'm just so excited about this because Andrew, we haven't seen each other in many years, but there's a variety of reasons I wanted him to come over, but we've been talking for about the past 30 minutes, like nonstop, and he's absolutely one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life, and I guarantee you, like I literally guarantee you that if no matter what we end up talking about, it's really, really good stuff, and it's deep, and it's artistic, and it's creative, and it's special, and he's special, and I think we'll start. Do you want to? Yeah, we should intro you. I'm not super like professional
No,
with
it's
all
all
of
good.
this,
It's all
but
good.
yeah,
I love it.
yeah,
I love it.
yeah.
I think even just introductions are interesting, right? Because
Yeah, right. Exactly.
You can.
Yeah, you're like
How do you
yes.
How do you focus? Like our journey
Yes.
is internal and external, right? And then the internal is sort of guiding the external decisions. And so you can look, and we can say a lot of times when we're doing introductions, we're always looking at like our career path, and, like,
Totally.
things that we've done and accomplished that can look like these like frameworks, and say
Right. They give people like a justification for continuing to listen. Oh, he did that?
which in some ways it's like paradoxically is helpful because you
Yeah.
want to know the context of where things come from, and simultaneously, there was this quote that said sometimes people mistake authority for truth, but in reality truth is the only authority, right? And so it works both ways. But to go down that pathway and that experience,
yeah.
right? For me, I grew up as an actor. I started acting and modeling when I was quite young, and I moved to LA when I was 14, and then did pretty well, I guess.
I wanna pause because I think I know that as part of that, because one of our connections for certain is around spirituality and manifestation, and that you sort of like had a dream that you would be like a child actor, and then it happened. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So you had a very early experience of the power of thought and manifestation. Yeah.
Completely. And it was interesting in a lot of ways, like the joy and pain of accomplishing, right? Because I feel like our mind and the mechanism of our attention, in some ways you could say, is neutral, and the question is where is that desire coming from, right? Because we can create a lot of things in our lives and in the world, and then the question is the result of that actually bringing more harmony into your life and into your heart, or is it going to ultimately lead to more suffering? And it's not binary, right? Sometimes it's an amalgamation of both of those things in varying degrees. And so I find that my journey, even, I started acting when I was 12, 13, and then by the time I was about 15, 16, I was on a television show that was pretty popular.
ER, yeah?
No, I was on that show for a couple of episodes,
Yeah.
but I was a series regular on the show called My Wife and Kids. That was
Yeah.
an ABC show starring
Yeah.
Damon Wayans, and that was really beautiful for me to experience on one level, because it taught me that I can accomplish the things that I desire.
Yeah.
But on another level, I feel like it was somewhat depressing because I was functioning under the collective social narrative that a lot of people have around what's going to lead to happiness, and that's supposed to be fame, success, money, right? Like you get those things and your life is made, which is just completely an illusion, and I had to discover that.
Did you discover that firsthand, or did you discover that more from seeing the people you were working with that were adults? So the name, Damon Wayans, was it? Yeah. So I mean, and at the time, I assume, if I'm not mistaken, he's like a huge star at this time.
Yeah.
This isn't just like, oh yeah, I remember the Wayans brother. I mean, this is the height.
Yeah. And to answer your question, it wasn't that I was just observing this from people, because I think from the outside, when you meet people, very often they can be happy or present themselves as such.
Yeah, charismatic.
But the question, charismatic and charming and fun and all these things. And the question is, like, how do they feel inside their depth of soul? And for me, it was a personal thing. It was more just a matter of knowing that I'd had this dream and then had accomplished this thing, and it was beautiful in a lot of ways, right? Because like I said before, it's not just binary. It's usually an amalgamation of both those things.
Sure.
And so...
Yeah, and even just discovering that you can have an intention in your mind and in your imagination, and that it can come true. Like, even if what ends up coming true is like, oh, I don't actually like this. I mean, that's like a skill set that many people don't have as, middle-aged adults.
All right. And then it's a refinement process, right? Because then it's just a matter of learning, okay, what do I put my attention on, which is constantly evolving, right?
Right.
And so, so at that period of time, I continued to act for quite some time, and it was interesting because it sort of moved beyond the accomplishment of status and fame and money, and it really kind of became more of a spiritual art form, because there was so much around expression and being able to express myself, and also to be able to express things that I felt socially needed to be shared, but sort of
and dig into yourself, find the reservoir of And I remember we've never discussed this, but in reading your bio, and in case we go down this path in this conversation, I'd like to bring it up now. One of the things that you said is like that you weren't super happy about how you were contributing to like portrayals of black men, and
completely. I started to become aware of a lot of the, depending on who's writing the roles, they can only know so much about a certain person. And so, we as individuals, we know ourselves as fully encompassing and complex human beings with many nuances, right? And I started noticing that, 8 out of the 10 auditions I was going on was for some person who was trying to convince the cops why they didn't kill someone, right? Or I'm on trial, and I'm like, why?
You know what's really crazy too is like, I knew you were gonna say that. I mean, that's such a strong thought form. Like, that's what black guys do. They're gangbangers.
Yes.
They're framed for being gangbangers. Yes. That's black guys.
Yes.
And it's like, whoa.
And I think women experience this a lot too. I think like black men and women of all races, they have like a lot of things in common, whether they know it or not. And it is just this idea of this experience oftentimes of being stereotyped, of having, either certain things that you're supposed to be known for, right? Or
you say women, I see something low cut and kind of like, some kind of side thing.
Yeah, and so it's an unfortunate thing, and it seems like to a certain degree I'm like observing things changing slowly, that people who are actual people are now being depicted as such first, as opposed to the stereotype or caricature that society or whoever is creating this art is creating them as.
And for me, the most exciting part is that like even were it not to be changing, which I totally agree it is, we now have these platforms where we can be the people in charge,
Completely.
We don't need to wait for some writers to get with it or something,
Yep. And that's why the internet is one of the most powerful things, because these are all, the thing is that, like, whether we know it or not, right, when we're exposed to people, individuals, we are being shown a way of life, a way of being. We're being exposed to opportunities, and so what it does is it creates another variable in your matrix. And so if you've only been exposed to black men in a certain caricature, it's hard for you to even imagine that they would be different, because you've never been exposed to it, you haven't seen it. But as soon as that becomes more varied and there's more variables in it, now your mind starts to open up to more complexity, right? It's like, oh wow, there's more nuance. Okay,
I feel like the easiest way to understand that one is with gays, and that it's like 15 years ago it was so normal to be anti-gay, which 15 years later sounds like the most insane thing. And what I remember was during that transition period, as more and more people felt safer to come out of the closet, that more and more people knew someone that didn't fit, that were a new variable, like, oh, I like that person. I can't imagine being anti them.
And this is the case for all bias, right? Because our bias lives in a box. It doesn't encompass the reality of a human being. So I can keep going on this
keep
journey.
going, please.
Wherever you want to take it. But, so for me, my journey, because of these things that we were just talking about, I started to feel less attracted to the experience of acting, and I used to act, and just even and I should say the experience of acting as it exists in the industry, not the art form of acting in itself, right? Because these are two different things. Anybody who does anything creative knows that there's the creative process, and then there is the business of monetizing that creative process, right? Which can sometimes be a bastardization of that thing itself, or more or less keep the essence of that thing. And our job is, or our intention and aspirations as people who are creative, is to really maintain the purity of the essence of whatever it is that we're creating and not lose that. And so I felt like that was being lost a lot of times in my experience, and didn't feel resonant with the people who were in the industry. And these are general statements, and I know there's beautiful people inside the industry, but for me, it just started to become something I was turned off from and by. And so I got really into health at a certain point, and really into just my own health journey, and seeing what happened when I shifted from doing things like eating meat and dairy and went into juicing and fasting, and really experimenting on myself is kind of the way I like to look at it, and the revelations that brought into my life, and wanted to share that with other people. And so I ended
What kind of revelations did you?
Oh man.
Yeah.
Revelations around one, what food is actually doing, because I feel like the common perception is that food gives you energy, and so we think that food is our primary source of energy. But then it's interesting when you're on a fast and you haven't eaten in 10 days or something like this, and you're like, wow, I have more energy than I've ever had in my entire life. This doesn't make sense from what I've been told. I should be dead, right? Or I should be like groveling on the ground, but yet I'm waking up at 4 a.m. alert, clear. I'm like, I want to run, and I haven't eaten. So I started realizing what the relationship to breath was, the relationship to liquids and emotions, right? Because if we look at like emotion is very much like the water, and how, a lot of times people are suppressing things that they don't want to feel
for sure.
with density, right?
Ah.
So food is dense, right? It's vibrating. If you really want to go on this path, I'll share this
Yeah,
with you.
yeah, please.
One of the most powerful realizations I had about the physical reality is that this plant, if you guys can see it,
No, it's out of the frame.
Okay, so there's a plant over to my right. I'm looking at this desk. There's all kinds of physical things around me. What's the difference between all these things? Is really in their subtlest form and grossest form is just the structure of the geometry. In essence, it's not that there's different materials, because in the same way when you look at a tree, you're also looking at a different manifestation of sunlight. You're looking at a different manifestation even when you're eating a fruit of the earth, but in the form of a fruit, you can consume it and it's beneficial to you, and in the form of the dirt, maybe not so much, right? But it's still the same. It's a transmutation of the same thing. And so let's look at it this way. If you take this word information, right, and you break it down, you get two words. One is in, formation. When things are in a specific formation, it communicates information, right? So form and information. So if you take a sentence, what's the difference between a sentence and a bunch of scattered words? Right, a sentence is actually teaching you something. Information is being transmuted because of the alignment of the words, as opposed to the disorganization of the words. And so it is the organization of form that is informing us, but is also transmuting the function of things, because you can never separate form and function. If you've got 6 arms, right, you can do things that someone with 2 arms can't do because your form is different. So I'm being informed of your function through your form. And so I started having this realization around nature as a whole. Is like a lot of times we're even looking at plants from a very left brain, right, a left brain sort of mentality, and a reductionist mentality in order to understand things. But really, in a lot of ways, the universe is communicating to us through very, we can even say poetic, but very literal ways, right? I look at palm trees and they look very electrical, right? You're like, wow. And then the energy is moving upward, and it's the electrical current that brings things upward. And as well as, like coconuts are one of the highest sources of electrolytes, excuse me. And it's because, it's that energy it's literally exuding from the plant itself. When we can observe the form of things, we start to really see the interconnectedness and what's communicating. It's the same way too when we look at people, right? I can see the thoughts that you think by the countenance on your face, and also the makeup of someone's body or how they hold themselves. These aren't things that sometimes we know logically,
Of
but
course,
they're
yes,
being
yes.
communicated to us. And with people, because maybe we're more attuned to ourselves, it's very, very obvious. We can feel it. We know if someone has a lot of anger in them, even if they're smiling, because the creases in their face are formed in such a way that informs me of their anger, right, or their history thereof of anger. And so I just started looking at the physical reality much differently, very differently through this, just having the perception and becoming more sensitive. And when you're fasting, for example, you become empty, right? You're like, no more conditioning, right? And so I feel like for us to learn anything, it's really, really important that we're empty, because we come with so many ideas and so many concepts, and many of them are wrong. And so,
Wow, that's very interesting. Because I have, I've never. Let me back up. I have also done a tremendous amount of diet experimentation, and it has been extremely profound for me. But I don't think I've given it actually enough credit for how it informed the rest of my thinking, because much like you, discovering, like, I would say the most profound for me of all time was doing, like a 30-day trial of cutting out gluten and then reintroducing gluten, and then pretty much like falling asleep immediately and feeling like my sinuses clog. And so,
wow.
I would say I'm something like 10 years no gluten since then. And, that, of course, tremendously influenced my energy levels and all of like the kind of maybe obvious things that people that would be interested in nutrition would think of. But I never really thought about how it caused me to call into question everything. Like, okay, so if they the proverbial they were wrong about this,
Mm.
then who knows what else. So maybe crazy ideas I get about lifestyle choices or people to spend time with or where to live or how
Mm,
to
mm,
live,
mm,
all of a sudden it's like, well, why don't I give it a try
mm.
and see? And then, of course, I think what most people living alternative lifestyles find is that there are many lifestyles that are far more optimal for like you as an individual than like kind of the cookie cutter lifestyle that's handed down that's like good for everyone.
Yeah, well, it's because oftentimes we're not taught to
Yeah.
be totally empowered,
Yeah.
because you can't control someone that you empower. And so there tends to be fear around that from us. So even and I don't say this from a standpoint simply of just like corporate America or the
Right.
government. I
Yeah.
mean actually in every single relationship, period, whether it's your wife, your husband, or your family, right? People want to be able to have you within a distance that makes them comfortable. And whether they know it or not, they're not malicious a lot of times, but it's just human nature sometimes to want to confine people to the parameters at which you can stay in relating with them. Otherwise, they fall out of that, and it's a very scary thing, because you don't get the satisfaction of being in proximity to them at times, or in the way that you want to be. And so,
And especially since I know one of the directions that will turn is creativity, is that if someone begins, because I've definitely been this person and I've seen other people be this person, that you begin being more fully expressed in who you are creatively. And, creativity, there's always a risk involved in it and a vulnerability. And, for the people around you, maybe none of you have been creative up until that point. Now all of a sudden maybe you start growing and attracting attention or new friendships, partnerships with maybe more creative people. Now all of a sudden another human nature thing, I think, is to sort of feel like left behind, or less than. And so it's a lot easier, rather than now I have, let's say you get more creative, it's a lot easier for me to mock your creativity than to explore my own inner nature to find what's inside of me to be expressed.
right. And I think the mirrors of people life are always doing that, right? It's always that invitation, because I say there's a difference between like seeing someone who's really, really great and like worshiping them, or becoming someone who is admiring the quality in them that brought them to that place, that is an invitation for you to also take that on, right? It's like people are looking at Michael Jordan. Oh my God, Michael Jordan, he's the man, and I could, but he's actually just showing you of what people are capable of, and you can be the Michael Jordan in whatever. Like it's not to sit on the side and observe and say, oh wow.
And this goes back to something we were talking about before we went live. Is the two people that came to my mind when you just said that. One is Casey Neistat. Do you know who this? Yeah. And the other is this dancer, one of my most favorite dancers, named Slim Boogie. And when I think of the two of them, I'm just like, I could never be that good. They're so talented. But what they actually both have in common is they are probably two of the hardest working artists that I've ever encountered. And that part, it's funny the depths to which I avoid really taking that in, because that's something I could do something about.
Yes.
As long as I'm because I'm a real admirer.
Right.
When I'm like, I could never be like you. That's a very easy place for me to go to, and I've honestly never really considered the fact that maybe one of the safety places in that is that if I stop admiring and the quality, I go to the quality is hard work, and it's like, oh,
right.
I don't know.
Right.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Right.
Like,
Right. Because in some ways it's like it's almost you can escape when it's in a person because you can think that they're unique. But when you start to go to the quality, then you start to have to acknowledge, well, I actually also have access to that. And if I'm someone who worships hard work but isn't in the practice of hard work, then I can't really even say that I admire hard work. It's like, in a lot of ways, what we admire is really what we exercise, because it's not, someone said that action is the evidence of knowing. And in the same way, we can never make a statement that we aren't living and have it be true. Otherwise, we're separated from the idea of it. So to say that I'm someone who I really, really admire work ethic, but I have no work ethic is kind of really just not true, right? It's just, it's fancy.
It's like a platitude. Yeah.
It's just, It's semantics.
Okay, so we were on diet, and
Yes.
this leads you to, let's just fast forward. Where does this lead? Like
I started a juice company.
Yeah.
I had some money saved up after acting and decided I wanted to open up a juice bar, which I did in LA, and that was a whole journey. And that was really, for me, the journey of going from like being creative in a certain sense, because I'd always done things but to actually becoming what I would say an entrepreneur. I've always been entrepreneurial, but I would never say it that I was really, really an entrepreneur until I understood the implications of what it was like to run a business. At one point we had 2 stores and I probably had over 30 staff members.
And you started as a food truck, yeah?
Yeah, we started as a
So
juice
I mean,
truck.
you really and I remember it was all very impressive to watch, like the branding, open source organics. It all looked, it's like when you have a friend that does something, there's a certain amount of like, I hope it's good, man.
Yeah.
And then, when I remember specifically like the branding, very much exceeded my expectations. And so, where does that come from in you? That I'm realizing there's a kind of consistent through line that I see in you of pretty solid dedication to quality and professionalism that I don't really associate with a lot of the circles that we may run in of kind of like the yoga, Burning Man, health food world, where it's like, as long as you give it your best, as long as you try, like, oh, that's great. Oh, you did that yourself in Photoshop? Wow, that's awesome. Where, but if you compare it to what's coming out, what like billboards you see of Netflix or something,
Sure.
It's not like,
Right.
but we're not,
Right.
but that's them. But you don't
Sure.
seem to create that.
Right.
That's my perception.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I'm understanding what you're saying,
Yes, yeah.
You're more so asking the question of like, where does that drive for quality come from? And it's hard to say in a lot of ways. I feel like for me, and maybe it's historically as like being an actor at
Sure.
a very young age. I was
Sure.
surrounded, I remember working on The West Wing when I was like 15 years old, and this is a show that their weekly budget is probably over $5 million, and you're working with people who are like the best of what they're doing. And I've just always, I think it's also connected to my desire and knowing of what is possible, right? And I think that sometimes we don't put our best foot forward if we don't believe. It's almost like we are okay with failing because we can tell ourselves in the back of our minds that we didn't really try, because it's really hard to put yourself out there 110% and then fail and fall on your face, because then you don't have any excuses to fall back on. And so I'm just more so driven by the potential of what can actually be created.
Sure.
And I oftentimes too, truthfully, like I often feel like I'm still playing too small. Like, and I think that's all comparative, right? It's like we look at some people, and then we can say it's small.
Yeah.
Right. You're like, right. Like you listen to some of the conversations he's having, you're like, I'm thinking small. I'm like, and which is interesting too, because I often reflect on as we're talking about path and all of these things and conditioning, and I look at things that already exist, and oftentimes what we're trying to do as individuals, when we look at our being, we are a manifestation of something brand new, right? But we're looking to do, as brand new beings, to forge old paths, right? Things that already exist. We don't oftentimes consider the fact that the reason we're here is to do something that's never been done before, because we are composites of something that has never been created before. We are literally the manifestations of that. And so why shouldn't our entire life be the reflection of how unique we actually are, right? That's so for me, I start to consider that, and I get inspired by that. And it's not a limitation. It's really an invitation.
I'm not ready. I'm genuinely not ready to turn the conversation in this direction, but this is definitely a part of why I wanted to have this conversation, because when you're saying that, the person that comes to my mind is Kanye West.
Yeah.
And this like, I'm not here to repeat. I'm not here to look at the past. I'm not here to reflect. I'm here to go to Wyoming and get away from all of you and make something new. And I feel like, not specifically with like current events of Kanye West, but of the specific climate that we're in, of a kind of conformity coming out of uncertainty of whether our impulses are appropriate. Like it's I feel like we're in a very interesting time, and I don't judge it. I don't think it's either good or bad, but it's like, let's just take something like the Me Too movement. I know from it seems like in many things that I read, one of the things that men are now being forced to deal with, and hey, it is what it is you have this impulse to lunge at someone, to express attraction to someone. Maybe the relationship has a component of like professionalism, and now maybe in the past it's like, hey, I have my urges, I have my impulses, I'm here to create new things, I'm here to be fully myself. Boom. And now it's like, whoa, wait, I don't know if this is okay. And I personally believe that what comes after this is really great, and that it's very necessary to go through this, because there have just been so many people whose impulses, like even as a black man, like the natural impulses of a black man, we have all these historical records of it leading to being killed, right? So this
like
idea,
what exactly in that case? What are you referring to?
Oh,
exactly?
I'm saying that the trope of like a black guy looking at a white woman the wrong way, get him,
Right.
So just that like the I actually don't have a strong opinion on privilege and how real and not real it is. I can see both. I can see many sides to it, but what I can say is that I don't think that every person has had the feeling that their impulses are safe to go with, And my dream, I have a dream that when we work through all of this, we live in a world where we go back to a sort of like privileged white guy, but everybody's the privileged white guy, and everybody is bumping up against everybody else and going with their impulses, because everyone is empowered. Let's just say a woman is empowered to say, fuck off, get away from me. And the whole society, if one does not listen, everyone is going to back her, because the one thing that is unacceptable is forcing another person. Any expression, I want you, fine, but if it's not reciprocated, like, the end.
Right. It's a tricky thing, right? Like, because we're dealing in a situation, like, life. It's interesting that we're having these conversations, because these conversations in a lot of ways are a testament to where we are, because we're getting into spaces that are a lot more subtle and nuanced, and people's impulses, although we can say that it's a non-physical thing, but if we look at the hierarchy dynamics of people in a work environment, and a boss says something like, I want you, that in someone else's mind can mean, okay, well, in order for me to keep my job, and I've got kids to feed, which is a very physical thing, right? And we could be homeless. I need to, like, acquiesce to this circumstance in order, right? So it's a words are a non-physical thing that create the physical reality. So they're just sort of like, it's interesting where we can start to bridge those gaps where they start and stop, because it just bleeds into one another in a lot of ways, right?
And man, so to add to the nuance, I hope and assume that you're familiar with the work of Jordan Peterson. So I, for what it's worth, am a big fan, and I feel like I've learned a tremendous amount from Jordan Peterson. And one of the most interesting things that I have taken in from him is this idea that makeup, primarily female makeup, it simulates physical arousal. So it hijacks, in a way, the brain, the wiring of the biological brain. By simulating arousal, it also causes arousal. And so one of his more controversial, I guess, statements is about, maybe we're going to need to discuss, if we're going to discuss things like this about boss, these kind of physical things, is it acceptable to simulate sexual arousal in the workplace? And obviously the counter argument is something like, hey, I'm free to express how I want to express. This is my body to decorate as I see fit. But then and I agree with you. And this is really, I just want to say to listeners, this is why I was so excited to have this conversation, because I honestly can't think of anyone that I feel like that I'm more excited to, like, dance in these nuances with, because I don't think either of us would ever think that there's an answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that unfortunately
Yeah.
people believe, or can have had the habit of believing, that there is some sort of definitive way of navigating every circumstance, and so we get into this almost religious dogma of how all companies should be run, right? When in reality, and something that I like about what Jordan Peterson talks about, is that things are constantly this negotiation, right? And so one thing I wanted to go back to that you were talking about as it pertains to people's impulses is, I think that we need to have with our impulses, we also need to have spaciousness, right? We need to have, because some of our impulses, we know as human beings, as this evolving species, aren't helpful. If I have the impulse and I just listen to my impulse to eat cake every night, that's going to lead me down a path that's, so I have basically two impulses playing out simultaneously, one to be healthy and one to eat cake, right? And so the question of what decision is made is going to be based on which impulse I'm more tuned to and which one I want to follow through with, and so on and so forth, right? And so as we get down the pathway of looking at people expressing themselves and having an impulse, and it's an interesting thing, right? Because I can't, in essence, control anything that someone else does. I think as a society we do our best, and we sort of have like this feeling of being ostracized if we step too far out of the bounds, and so that way it's kind of like controlling us. But I feel like we it's a negotiation, right? It's a moment to moment, because if women can have the conversation and say, well, it's my body, I can express what I want. Can a man walk into work, fully erect and say, well, I'm naked and I'm no? We have it's just there's certain environments that have certain intentions, and we can be aware of that. They might be better solved if an environment functions in a certain way, right? And so then people can choose to make the agreement to work in an environment in one way or another, right? In both extremes, because there could be workplaces where people are like, yeah, it's hot here and we all have our shirts off and nobody's really got issues around it because we're all innocent to this thing, or we are aware that there's like sexual tension and that's okay and that's going to play out the way it does. And how does that actually, because there's so many things that are at play, right? Like you've got the economics that are at play, and stakeholders and stockholders and what their outcome is, and then you have human relationships, because we're social creatures, and people do bond with one another through work environments, and what's going to promote that, and all of these things have to be considered. I don't think we can deny any of them. I think we have to really find out what does that look like. And so now a lot of times people are, and individuals are being drawn to companies that have ethos that relate to their own, and if they don't, then they go somewhere else, and that's beautiful to say for people with options, right? And then people who aren't and don't, it's a lot more challenging. And so I think ultimately it's interesting for humanity to finally get to a place where we can have complicated conversations and go, oh, there's no right answer, because we're always I think sometimes it's actually better to ask good questions than to have bad answers. And I think a lot of times we have really, really bad answers for the sake of because of the fact that we're too uncomfortable just to be with the question. And now I feel like we're kind of almost moving into a place where we're able to approach situations with nuance. And last thing I'll say is, it relates to this, is I know for me, I grew up with women around me, my sisters, my mother, I have two sisters, and I, because of that, found myself as a man being very, very sensitive to the female predicament, almost to the point of my own detriment, right? Where I later on would hear in certain, through the grapevine, people would come around and say, Andrew, like this woman, like she really, really, she was like wanting you to approach her, but you didn't, because you were so sensitive to not come across as that guy who was being overly aggressive, right? And so I think it's a nice thing to a degree that men are now considering, because maybe in the past we've never even considered, and we've just been in a place where we've just had a feeling and done it because there were no repercussions, and now we're going, okay, but everything kind of has its varying degrees, because you can become overly sensitive. In the Tao, they talk about how extremes create one another, right? That the top of a wave at its highest point is actually closer to the bottom of the ocean, because that's exactly where it's going to travel before it actually is in the middle and reaching equilibrium. So our job as human beings is really to, even when we're triggered or we're like moved to these edges, don't move in the opposite extreme, right? And actually get to the point where we can see, what is the middle path like? What does balance look like in this? Because we always want to react, and we're so reactive. And I think that there's a lot of beauty in this Me Too movement, and that I feel like, my God, thank the Lord that this conversation is happening. And simultaneously, yeah, it could get to the point when it seems like, and sometimes it has gone to a degree where people are getting fired just based on accusations, and people are saying things are like rape that weren't rape, and things are, it's like, okay, cool, like all that too, but we have to have a conversation. We don't put everything in a box. And I feel that that's the beauty of maybe the time hopefully we're moving more towards, is like getting out of the simple boxes, bad guy, good guy. No, human with nuance, with some good intention, some things that they needed to work out, did something they probably shouldn't have done, like, or every variation of that. We're becoming more complicated, which is important, because that's the truth of who we are.
When you just said the importance of asking good questions, I feel like the question you just said, what does balance look like, is just, it's almost like, at least in this moment, it feels to me almost like the supreme question, because especially here in Los Angeles, we have all of these cultures, all of these races, all of these religions, all of these gender expressions, all of these sexual orientations, ages, abilities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And each through the lens of each one of those filters, balance looks different. And I've always been deeply inspired by when I was in my early 20s. I was pretty heavily into activism, and I think one of the main things that stuck with me was Desmond Tutu's creation of like the Truth and Reconciliation Committees in South Africa after apartheid, where everyone got an opportunity to tell their story of the role that apartheid played in their life, either as oppressor, oppressed, on and on and on, but with no judgment. And the idea being that there's this innate need for resolution and to have your story heard and your perspective felt. And what I see as what I experience is maybe like the excesses of some of these movements and of identity politics and all of this. It feels to me, when I feel into like what does balance look like, the fundamental thing is someone feeling like their story is being heard. And I genuinely feel like we can't even know the answers because we don't even know the variables. I really like what you said about variables. You know, like each new perspective adds a new, like, just as a kind of random example, I literally have no idea what it's like to be in a wheelchair, right? And all of the aspects of sidewalks and public transportation that come with that. And so I could think I am designing my utopian society and it's going to work. And I'm thinking, well, you're black and it'll work for you, and that person's gay and that's a woman, and I've got everyone covered. And now we can all live in my, and it's like, oh, the wheelchair. I didn't think of that at all. And and I think the beauty, what it feels like to me, is if social media is all of a sudden every perspective is just thrown together. And of course right now it's like the Roman gladiators, just like bloodshed and hatred, but seeing beyond that, you know,
it's an interesting thing because it's like, I think about when we talk about identity politics and like just identity as a whole, any identity that we have. Let's say, so for me, I'm a layer of identities. Just are you, right? Like your age, your height, your musical preference, your sexual orientation. All these things are just different layers of identity. And if we don't, as human beings, identify with the thing that is most connected, the only reason for having that identity is to separate us, right? It's like, what's the relevance of me being black if I'm not trying to separate myself from everyone else? Otherwise, what's the point? It doesn't have any other function, really, even though to a certain degree, when we separate ourselves, I can say, well, now I'm included in this other group, which may have some benefit, but the benefit will always be limited, right? Because there's always opposing sides. And so that group is going to be against other groups, whatever the identity.
And the group is going to, I think, have its own norms that only partially include who you are fully expressed. So it's almost like any group, every individual has to cut off the edges of themselves. And that, to me, that's the part of what Kanye West, and especially more Candace Owens, who he references, that's the part that I resonate with the most, is this idea of the rejection of group identity because we are fundamentally individuals. And completely. That if we give that up temporarily to maybe correct perceived historical injustices, it may not be easy to reclaim the individuality.
Yeah, I think it's both, right? It's almost like I'm not just a man, but I am a man. And I'm not just black, but I am black, right? It's like these are all layers to the onion, and the onion is a complete thing unto itself. And so the question always comes down to is, when is this helpful and appropriate and relevant, and when is it not? And so I think my journey is actually quite interesting in the sense that, my family is Jamaican, and so I think because of that, I didn't always have the typical Black American identity,
Yeah,
although I'm aware it's like, yeah, we're all from Africa.
sure.
But then, it never really served me too much to
Like
be.
Jamaican is in like patois and the whole. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so for me, I never got overly identified with the idea of being Black because I didn't really see the relevance. And there are ways in which I've experienced racism or anything, but to me it's just like it's never been to the point in my own journey where it's been, because here's the thing that's really interesting about this, right? In this conversation, people can go to well, there's a lot of police brutality and the police as this entity and against Black people. On one level, completely true, that's right, but on a deeper level, we're actually dealing with the essence of the quality of violence or hatred or qualitatively having human bias. These are really the enemies. It's manifest in these power structures as the police and as like particularly Black people. Maybe could have been any race, but history kind of played out this way, and this is the way that it is right now. And so I think that the problem with those things is then once again we take on the police force or police as a whole as this like singular entity, and we don't go after. But I say all this to say we shouldn't separate the two, because it's not either or, right? It's both. And we have to do them both in tandem. Otherwise, we get lost. And there are unfortunately going to be bystanders in that process. And so it's not just police brutality against Black people. That's true. That exists. And there's, all kinds of like
Data.
There's data and there's, social structures
Yeah.
that have been put in place.
Yeah.
And all that's real.
Yeah.
That's real. So we don't deny that. But we don't limit ourselves there. Otherwise, the conversation stops at a place where
So
really
what is it? What do you? I mean, I don't even know that there's an answer to this, but what does that look like? What is a both response?
We get to the point, like you were telling this story about apartheid and every individual telling their story.
Yeah.
So in the same way, it's like in a game, I can be opposed to you. Like, let's say we're playing chess against one another. On one level of the game, depending on what meta we're at, we are playing against one another. But at the highest level, we're actually participating because we made an agreement to play this game together, right? So we're cooperating while we are opposing one another. And so for me, I feel a lot of it comes down to the perspective and the consciousness of the individuals to realize that ultimately we all want the same things, and we're actually connected at the root. Even though at the top of this it looks like we're divided and we're against one another, we're actually really in our hearts wanting to work towards being connected, to have peace, to have joy, to have harmony. Because if we forget that, then there's always going to be winners and losers. And we know historically what happens is one group comes out of power and then the oppressed become the oppressors. That's it. If we don't really get wise to what's all realities taking place simultaneously.
Right. And in my younger years, the way I would like encapsulate what you said is that philosophically, the fundamental issue is power. It's not who has power, it's power itself. And where this led me to philosophically was to anarchism, because anarchism, like anarchy, archy is like hierarchy. It means without levels. I believe archy in Latin is level, like architect, right? It's about levels. So hierarchy is, this boss employee. Anarchy means fundamentally peer-to-peer. It doesn't have anything to do, philosophically, anarchy doesn't have anything to do with chaos. It has to do with the fact that everyone is in a decentralized relationship and no one group rules over any other group. And for these kinds of reasons, I was super drawn to this, and I definitely think there's a chance that we are moving, or at least some of us are moving in a direction like that, because the internet actually facilitates the possibility of doing anarchical systems in a way that, the traditionally, as far as I know, the reason that anarchy hasn't worked is because if one Genghis Khan comes along, none of you are allied, and he just takes you all over, and there goes your anarchy.
Right.
But in these kind of like cryptographic digital systems, potentially it won't be possible to do this, at least in a digital level.
Right.
I feel like I lost the plot momentarily, but yeah, these nuances, like I just I guess all I know how to do is have conversations, right, with people that I think are thinking also, and have their own perspective, and fundamentally like want the same end result, of a world where the individual is empowered regardless of whatever group identities they happen to have rolled the dice and found themselves a part of. And, obviously, like, that was what the French Revolution was about, but that was an example where the oppressed became the oppressor. So I feel like one of the things that is different about the time we find ourselves in now is we have all of these historical precedents that a lot of things that sound great when you read about them as ideas, when they actually play out and are mixed with human nature, they become super, super unworkable and even more totalitarian and, oppressive than systems which kind of seem, when you read about them, oppressive.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting thing to approach things from the systems level, right? Like, one of my favorite quotes is that there is never a physical solution to a spiritual problem. A lot of times we're always looking to rearrange the furniture, and the issue is not the furniture. And so how do we, it's in the same, like, if we had this idea of what, everyone's vision of a utopian society looks different, right? And so we can impose these practices that are like become the dogma of good, and to someone else it's a tyranny. But in the idea of it, it's all love. Oh, we're going to get together and we're going to sing, we're going to dance, but this is the law. Like, you have to do this.
Yeah.
Right? You have to be loving, which is oppression. And so it's an interesting thing when you think about, like, how do we as individuals, everything in this world, everything that we've created, even this, house that we're in, is a manifestation of someone's consciousness. It was a thought at one point, everything. And so we as human beings must address things at the root, because we can never fix the cosmetics of it. You want to put makeup on the face, but your digestion's messed up, and that's why your face is all, expressing that, right? Your face is trying to show you, but you keep trying to cover up the symptoms, when at the root, humanity at some point either will or won't, collectively and individually, evolve towards realizing that our consciousness and who we are as individuals is at the forefront, and that's the only thing that we can focus on in order to get results that are holistic, not just cosmetic.
It's interesting that I hadn't really considered this till then, but that this is what Jordan Peterson came to as well, that the only way to do this great work of, building a new world, a utopian world, is each person, whatever the cards they were dealt, taking on the burden of life for themselves and doing what they can to become a model for others, right? And it made me feel really good with what you were saying, because I feel like one of the best things that I know how to do is just have conversations like this and put them into the world, not just have them in private, but offer them into the world as a, not now we tell you what to think, but here are some things that we're thinking about that maybe make you think your own things, and, the kind of 100th monkey sort of. And, that one of my favorite spiritual concepts is the idea that we are fundamentally, we're like radio broadcasters and receivers simultaneously. I believe the word for that is transcasters. And that the most powerful thing a human can do is just emit a frequency. And like a radio station, others can choose to tune in if they see fit, you know.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, like I can see, for what it's worth, for those that can't see, though it looks like you can see in the, like, your complexion is nice, and you know, this has, I assume, everything to do with diet, right? Like I think that's so profound what you said. I mean, it's, in some ways, for me at this point, it's obvious, but at the same time, what I don't realize is sometimes I hope you can relate to this as well. Like, we're so deep in this world that you can forget that there are people that have never even had this thought that their complexion is related to their diet. You know, like that's
well,
whoa.
Well, in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
they're being told that. I remember going to the dermatologist as a kid and going like, because my skin was jacked up. And I remember asking the dermatologist, like, you know, like, I eat pizza and I'm eating all this stuff, and I'm like bringing this to his attention, and he's like, no, it doesn't have anything to do with that. And I thought, that can't be right. I really want to believe you, but I don't believe you deep down, right? And so we know we have a deep knowing as far as a lot of things are concerned, but unfortunately we haven't built a practice in our life to listen to those things, and so they kind of just go under the radar.
And strangely, at least in my opinion, in mainstream society, we're often led by like the least informed, not the, you know, like what you're talking about is considered alternative health,
right? Which is kind of paradoxically and more interestingly, like, only became alternative within the last 400 years, but for like the history of humanity, it was just called health. Right, or it's just called medicine, and now we say alternative medicine. It's like, well, no, this is what we're doing just now, like, has been more of the experiment.
Just like conventional produce and organic produce. It's only like what we call conventional produce has only even had the capacity to exist for like 100 years.
Yes, exactly.
And now it's conventional.
Yeah, it's all new. It's all new. There was something I was going to say based on what you said before. I'm trying to remember, actually.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Maybe it'll come back.
Sure,
we were going down a rabbit hole.
Yeah. I feel like turning to creativity, right?
Sure.
Right before the conversation we were having, right before we're like, okay, we got to start. Let's start. Was about, I actually would love for you to repeat what you said about music, and just as a maybe an entry point, like as what's unique about music.
Sure. Yeah, we were talking because Otis was sharing some of his music with me, and I was sharing that I also have been making music for quite some time. And he asked, like, you know, what's been my impetus for making music? And at some point, I had the realization that music is the highest art form. And some people don't want to quantify these things, but the realization that I had is that, you know, sound and music are the only things that you don't have to willingly participate in. They take up space, right? I'm walking to the grocery store and I'm listening to this song. I'm not choosing to. It's just like it takes up space. And so if I am in proximity to this thing, it is going to come into my consciousness. So that was the first realization I had. The second thing that I realized is that we learn language through song and melody, more specifically, right? Like the alphabet is A, B, C, D, E, F, D. That's a song, right? And it's not a coincidence that we will remember. We might not even remember even the lyrics of a song, but we'll remember the melody, because so much of life is this melody, is this song. And so for me, I had that realization and was aware of on the subconscious levels. One day I was meditating and this song came into my consciousness, and I started to realize, like, the place that song was able to resonate in my spirit was the place where I had an opening to, like, receive that thing, and a lot of it was ego. And I was like, oh, this is like my ego subconscious playing itself out, that I was indulging in that thing. And so I realized that the music is feeding different parts of ourselves, and so having the intention to speak life into people and to speak life into life itself, I felt called to make more, you could say, conscious hip hop or whatever we want to call it, but just music that is affirming love, affirming life, and intending to support humanity's evolution.
And how important is this kind of creativity to where you're at right now? This is a question I genuinely don't know the answer to. Yeah. We haven't discussed this. How
important? It's hard to quantify, but I know that I'm I'm just someone who expresses, right?
Mhm.
As an entrepreneur, I feel like entrepreneurialism is very, very creative.
Yeah.
I make music.
Yeah. I think it's
I
one
was
of the most
acting,
underrated
I was-
forms of
Yes,
creativity.
completely, because it takes a lot of creative problem solving constantly. You're constantly
And it's the only form of creativity that I know of that's like actively bad mouthed. Like you don't hear somebody talking about making a song and you're like, oh, you're one of them,
right,
you know?
right.
Whereas with entrepreneurship, it's like, oh, you're one of those people
Sure.
destroying the world,
Sure.
you know?
Right, in any way, or the opposite, right?
Well, of course. I
and-
mean, that's the paradox.
And through systems and organizations, where a lot of times we're creating social structures and realities to themselves, right? Because even companies they have their own laws and bylaws and just ways that people interact with one another and things that they do. And I found it to be quite interesting to be able to influence that for the positive. But going back to music, it's an interesting thing for me because I never approach my music as a career. And so I think in that way, it's really beautiful because it's almost innocent. It's like, it's just a very pure expression, and it doesn't have all the ideas of needing to be anything other than it is. Because there's no, a lot of things that we do in life is just like means to an end. There's nothing else. It's just like the expression is there, and I get this thing from life that says you should share this. And so I do, and I don't get attached to what comes of it. I have intentions, and then everything else I don't mind. And so it's beautiful for me to have things in my life that I participate with in that way, and I intend for most of my life to become that way.
I love it. It actually makes me think. I said something about I played Andrew a music video that I'm working on, and what struck me is, because I haven't showed it to many people so far, is that in showing that I felt so good because it made me feel like he got to see who I really am internally. It's like an externalization of my internal reality. And I think what you're saying is I experience my own creation of music and music videos very similarly, where it's one of the only things in my life that I'm not trying, I don't have an agenda to make it something.
It's interesting. I was hearing through the grapevine, someone said that Paul McCartney was talking about the era of time when the Beatles, which I would say, the Beatles, they're one of the most beautiful and diverse bands. If you look at the body of work that they created, it was like so. Like I was thinking about the fact that they have like the Hare Krishna mantra in one of their like hit songs, and if anybody came out with a song where the chorus was like Hare Rama, like what? Right? Most people that's just not in vogue, right? And so, but what he was talking about is how back then the music industry, there was no music industry. People just made music. It was like they made music in their garage. It wasn't to the degree that people knew what was possible in terms of career and status and fame and money. And so a lot of ways, because of that, they were so unencumbered. They had no reason to be like inhibited, because there was nothing at stake at the time in the beginning, right? And so I think it's different now when we know what's possible in all forms of creativity for people to become conditioned to the parameters of what exists, going back to what we were saying before, because they have this agenda, they're running it through the lens of what's supposed to be. It's just too tainted by the expectations.
And it's fascinating. Like I can't remember where I saw this recently, and this could easily just be a conspiracy theory, but for some reason I feel like it's true. Somebody was saying that I think it was like an up and coming. It was the Backpack Kid. I saw an interview with the Backpack Kid with the Backpack Dance, and he was saying that he knew someone who worked in like the marketing company that made the deal with Nicki Minaj, and they were basically like, look, you turn yourself over to us, and we will create the right look for you, we will create the right type of music for you, and we will turn you into a star. And it's interesting because what it means is, when you talk about stakes and what's possible, what's funny is it reminds me of the dermatology thing, is like you're comparing your own innocent, naive, pure creativity to like a corporately manufactured product that has very little to do with not very little, that has only something to do with the actual innate expression of that person.
Yeah.
But what's beautiful, and again, is that that doesn't put any constriction on anyone other than the constriction that they choose to take on in their own mind. Just because Nicki Minaj or Katy Perry or Justin Bieber is out there has no relevance to me. I have YouTube too. I have a YouTube account. I can
and the people who've become most influential, kind of, they've been setting the trend. Everyone else decides to follow, but it's too slow for them to even. And sometimes people who are not visionaries, they can't see where things are going, or they can't create where things are going. And it's, for me, as you were speaking, the thing that it came down to is just it's freedom. It's, you can decide to trade part of yourself, but what are you worth? Like, really, at the depth of you, like, what is your integrity worth? What is your truest expression worth? Like, how much could someone pay me to make a song that was going to...
Right.
It's just, I don't need it that much, right? It's like, there's no amount of money in the world that's going to make me feel like I need to go create, because it's just also not who I am. And a lot of times what happens is people become brands, and you in some ways, and this is a whole nother, we can go that way. It's a deep conversation about like what branding really, really is and what a brand is. But a lot of times people are, oftentimes we project and are composed of qualities, and so every individual, we could say, has a narrative that is either true or not true, but they exist as that brand in our mind. And so people become more of these caricature brands that is not really who they are. It's not the brand of themselves. It's not them owning their own identity, but it's someone else's. And when you become fragmented, I mean, that is what suffering is, right? It's like, it's feeling one thing and doing another, or being one person in your internal and then expressing yourself as another. You're living in a cage.
Yeah, two examples that have been very influential for me in this regard. We'll start with the more innocent one first, which is Casey Neistat has just been a huge influence on me over the past few years. And one of the things that I noticed, because I've followed him extremely closely, is that this is a guy who swears a lot. And he hides it. He cuts it from everything he does. And, I believe that he probably has the best intentions for that, of like creating something that families can watch together, etc. And I think he's clearly a guy who either regularly smokes cannabis or is around people that do, or on and on like that. And he makes only the slyest references to this. So it led me to believe that his life off camera is fairly different. Not massively, but fairly different.
Right.
And that really inspired me to not want to be like that. And then on a kind of more boom level, Jenny and I have long discussed how Pee Wee Herman started off as having like he had a show at I want to say Whiskey A Go Go, and that's how he got Pee Wee's Playhouse. And it was a theatrical kids show for adults. It was like a perv kids show, and it was like the I believe there's a character named Marion or Marianne, and in the TV show, it's like a little kids thing, but in the show, she's like this buxom, like almost S&M prostitute kind of dominatrix thing. And CBS basically was like, look, you just cut all that shit out. We'll give you $300,000 an episode, and you can just be super creative. And it's like an amazing achievement of creativity, but it bit him in the end, because fundamentally he's like a pervy guy, and not in a way where it's like he has every right to be. He's it's like he's an adult, he can do what he wants, but in cutting off that's kind of what I see, and part of the reason that I do, even the way when I said I'm not real professional with this in terms of it's because I'm not. This is very authentic to what you would see if you meet me.
Yeah.
Like it's and the reason that I've chosen to go this route is because my focus is so much on longevity, and one of the things that we relate on it is both physical longevity, but also just looking at nature, looking at trees, looking at really the authentic, long-lasting things in nature, and they're so self-evidently themselves.
Yes, and we have to be. And to me, once again, it comes back to freedom, because in the short term, we don't know how long we're going to be here, and we can have intentions of the direction that we're walking in, the journey that we're going on, but ultimately, it has to be in the direction of what is right for us, because sometimes we believe that at some point we're going to get it back, like, oh, we'll compromise myself now, and it's like, but the truth is, no, you're building the habit of compromising yourself, and that ultimately is a habit, because it only starts to create more circumstances and situations that present themselves that invite you to compromise yourself because of something that you want to get. And it's like being a drug addict, like, when do you say no? When do you stop? Because there's always more. So I think it is interesting, and I understand people, and I don't want to make blanket statements. Once again, things are complicated, and there's people who are in really, really tough spots, and they feel, or it may be the reality, that this one compromise is the gateway to some more freedom, and where they are now is some the opportunities that people can see and that are available to them vary. And I feel like sometimes it's more of a gift for myself that I feel and perceive a myriad of opportunities, and we can never know what someone is able to see or what's actually available to them. I don't know the reality of that, right? All I know is what I can see and where I am. And so sometimes people are in a place where there is a fork in the road and there are like 2 options or 5 or 10. And some people are in situations where that's not the case. There's just like, there's this or there's nothing, right? And so I think sometimes people make decisions based on that.
Yeah, and I would say, and I hope and think that you'll resonate with this, and I'm very interested in what you have to say about this. I think that fundamentally what it comes down to is that my ultimate goal really is like liberation and enlightenment. It's everything is in some sense in service to that, and what that means for me on a practical level is like truth. Like, was I really true? And that's, at some level that for me comes back to this question around impulses, because all of these things, it's like, how do I authentically express? Like, that's when I've had a number of experiences of like experiencing myself on my deathbed, and what has always come out of that is like, okay, like the goal here is really to have authentically expressed to the best of my ability who I was, and most of my life is spent reading and gaining skills and technical and craft-based skills to more like what we were talking about outside around the feedback as a mechanism to determine whether what you're attempting to transmit. So let's just say in this case for me, I'm attempting to transmit truth, right? In a spiritual sense. The feedback that I receive lets me know how well or not well I'm doing that, and then I can, use that as a way to steer my ship. But I think that like another one of my most favorite things, and this is Jenny's most favorite thing about Jordan Peterson, is his concept that it's really important to set a huge goal, because humans do not thrive on achievement. We thrive on progress, and that the steps towards something are really what count. So I know, like, as an example, over the past few years, to go to what you were saying about, like, there's always another thing, I have had a habit of stealing in various ways from mostly corporations and things like that. And that was one of the ways that I justified it, right? And, like, this is my retribution, Robin Hood, whatever kind of thing. And I always was like, oh, this is going to just stop, like, but it didn't. There was never a clear point. And then because that groove was worn, all of a sudden it became impulsive. There became an impulsive quality. But at some point that became the lowest hanging fruit in my life of like, hey, I'm trying to express truth here. Like, I'm looking at this thing. This isn't very true. And because of this big goal that this is out of alignment from, it was like, I'm not doing this anymore. Like, no.
Yeah.
And so for me with things like branding, I that's become really important to me, is to really build something around the qualities that I'm actually trying to actualize in my life.
And at that point too, it's not, because I think people can think of branding as something that is premeditated. But when we're being authentic to ourselves, it's not contrived. It's not something that we're doing, right? It's not like, oh, let me create my brand. It's like, well, no, you are being who you are fully, and then it sort of is realized. Like, oh, okay, that's how I'm reflecting. But it's not it's an inside out process.
It's like a spiritual practice of self-inquiry when it's done correctly, because it's like, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
And then the define, I mean, I think that's by far the most underrated aspect of stuff like business, is that it quantifies all of these nebulous things, and there can be so much like, wait, this is who I like, these 5 things on this page. But as you go down the path, you might actually find, 5 things where you're like, wow, that really is me. Like, whoa.
Right. And it's sometimes we can put it into words and sometimes we can't, but it's the same way that we have like what is a brand? A brand is a feeling that you get from a company, right? Like, that's how you know them. And it's not just what they say that they are, or
right.
Hey, I'm a nice guy, but like, I'm not a nice. It's like that doesn't work. And so why is it that with certain companies, whether it's Apple or whether it's Tesla, we have this feeling that is bigger than the car itself? It's like this company or this logo is actually a representation of the qualities of vision or change or progress. They are literally not as sheer words. They are literally the embodiment of that, and from that inspire other people, and other human beings are that as well, just from the way that they live their lives, and that's what their brand becomes. The word brand, just like the word business, I've oftentimes said there is no such thing as business. That's just an idea. In reality, people get together and organize their attention around central ideas. That's what a business is. Right now, as a legal entity, okay, great, we can make that agreement, but that's not it in reality. It's just people having an idea and a vision and collective agreements, and they organize themselves around that.
So maybe to come all the way back to open source organics, what was, because I definitely I only have been to the Sunset location, but I definitely in Hollywood, and it definitely had a feeling, And so
Yep.
how did that play out in your creation of open source organics?
That experience that people were having?
No, or what were you attempting to cultivate? Like, how did this idea of branding and like what, it may be being inspired by things like Apple and Tesla and so on. Like, how did that play out for you?
Yeah, for me, the word open was always like it was just the one that like resonated the most intensely. And then being aware of open source is like this experience of sharing and connection and community. For me, that was sort of the impetus of the name. And then in the experience of being there, a lot of it came down to educating and informing people, right, about health, and having a really strong parameter by which the people that we brought in, right, because everyone that you hire is going to also create the experience for everyone else. And so for me, it was really important that everyone that was working at the business had a strong connection to service through health. And I feel like because of that, we were all unified, and it wasn't this disconnected organization where people were here just serving a product. It was like people could feel when they walked in that it was bigger than just this moment of selling you a juice. It was like, no, we're committed to your health and we want to help you which was it for me, because I'd come from a background of I know you can make money, you can do things. It's like it's all good and it's fine, but I'm more inspired by actually like the real currency for me is people's lives changing. Like that for me is everything. Like money's nice and I appreciate it and I welcome it, but that's not why I do things anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when you see that it's possible to kind of like have your cake and eat it too.
Completely.
In that way.
And people have to know that that's possible. I think just as anybody with career and business, it's like you have to really, really know that you can do things that are good for the world and have it be good for you too.
And so let's continue chronology. Like, so you sell open source organics, and it
start traveling a lot.
Yeah.
I started consulting while I had that business, and that got me more into, and part of the reason even that I sold that business is I started to, the internet primarily, because I realized I can run businesses, and I do, and I like to do it, but I'm a communicator, right? I think it's important for us to actually understand what our gifts are and the things that we do that regenerate us. And so for me, sometimes when I'm doing business admin, it's exhausting. It's not really where I thrive. Whereas if I'm communicating, I'm speaking, I can feel myself gain energy. It's really palpable.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I felt, wow, I actually want to go to the internet. I want to start sharing content. I know that I can reach so many more people. Having a localized physical store, great. It needs to serve the people in your community, but I gain the skills that I need to gain from that experience. And I felt like, okay, I want to start doing things online, expanding, getting into online digital products. I have a business, a yoga teacher training business right now with a friend, and we're getting into that. It's East-West yoga.
Yeah, and this has been a through line throughout, like you've been a yoga teacher for like a long time.
Yeah, I started teaching. I started practicing over a decade ago, and I probably started teaching nearly 7 or 8 years ago. Yeah. And so, bringing me more towards where I am now, where I have a few businesses that are all socially conscious, partnered in a company called Gangster Vegan Organics, and it's in Philadelphia, East Coast, and we're starting to license out that brand to open up more locations, and then have something called the Give Love Project. I started developing these chains to really support homeless people and so on the backside of the chain there's this envelope, and inside the envelope is a letter which is someone who is living on the streets, and it's their story. And I felt like, one, just because for whatever reason for me growing up, I've always had just a feeling for people who are living on the streets. One, because their situation is challenging physically, but two, because I feel like they're oftentimes forgotten, like they're invisible. And the reason they're invisible is because people feel like they can't relate to them, or they have their stories or biases about their circumstance. And so I wanted to just expand that and give people I'm really, really, really interested in giving in the way that we do socially, and feeling like a lot of times for me growing up, it was very contrived. These holidays and birthdays, it's like, it's beautiful and I love it, but it always felt uninspired. And so I was feeling into like, which ways can I create a company, organization, inspire people to give in ways that are really, really fulfilling, actually, and not just this, choreographed, action that just comes from conditioning. And so that was that. And then, for me now, I'm also learning how to balance life and my own practices and my own evolution and relationship and family amongst still having really strong desires to grow things. And something that Jordan Peterson talks about a lot is that matrix, like that those elements coming together, because a lot of times when you're trying to grow something, it takes a significant amount of time and energy, and you have to do it in a way that's really, really smart and really committed. And I have really big visions, and I also have big visions for the quality of my life and my relationships, because people are so important to me, connecting with people like you, and I'm glad that we get to do this and share simultaneously. So to me, it's just a matter of growth and evolving in a way that encompasses all those things and readjusting, right, constantly, because there's all the feedback and we go, oh, this works, this doesn't work, okay, let me adjust.
What do you feel like the purpose of your life is, or even like the meaning of life? Like I don't go around asking people this question, but
I think that's such an interesting question in the sense that, it's this one teacher, a spiritual teacher, his name's Sadhguru. If they don't know, they need to know. Sadhguru, S-A-D-H Guru. he was saying, someone asked him this question, what's the purpose of life? And he basically was sharing, he said, the only reason you ask questions like that is because you're not in your bliss and you're not in your joy. Because if you're in your bliss and you're in your joy, you wouldn't ask what's the purpose. So in a lot of ways, like we say, ultimately, my purpose is to experience life fully and express as much life as possible. And simultaneously, I think a lot of times people maybe immaturely assume that life has, like when we use this word purpose, we almost like can assume a point. Like, what is the point of your life? And a point is a very limited thing. It gets rid of everything else before and after, right? So like your life, which is in a lot of ways, when I thought my purpose was like, oh, I'm going to be on a TV show, be an actor, and then you fulfill that, and you're like, I'm only 16, and I've got a lot of like, what now, all right? And so I more so feel qualitatively, my purpose is to grow and to express more life, more me, more truth, right? And as opposed to this idea that I'm here to do this quantifiable thing. I hope many beautiful and quantifiable things are happening as a byproduct of that, but that's not my goal, and I won't feel unfulfilled if that doesn't fulfill itself, right?
So maybe as a follow-up, I'm really, just for what it's worth, I'm just trying to pull. I feel like you have so much. I'm just trying to. How do you access it? So what are some of your favorite tools? They don't have to be esoteric necessarily. That you have found that have become a real part of your own experience of bliss that you have stumbled on or pursued over the years.
Yeah.
That other people could also access.
Yeah. I love it. Michael Bernard Beckwith, who you and I are both familiar with, shared that bliss is a byproduct of the activation of someone's potential, right? Because bliss is a very specific thing in terms of its level of exuberance, like happiness, joy, balance, like these are all like varying degrees. But when we go to like bliss, we can never really be blissful if we aren't fully expressing ourselves fully, because that's freedom. Freedom and bliss are their cousins or their brother and sister, right? They're connected. You can't be contracted in yourself and feel bliss, right? It's not truthful. You're not in that freedom. And so a lot of it is connected to my expression, right? Me expressing authentically, me expressing truthfully, and which is why music is very blissful for me. The creative process is very blissful in all forms. Me having visionary conversations with people, I can do it almost all day. I love it. And so that's very blissful. Speaking, right? It's a lot of it's all connected to that. I love to dance as well, and be spontaneous. All these things are, if I was to say, activities that are connected.
And I guess the first thing I was expecting you to say, so maybe this will help specify it more, is like, live foods or juice or something.
Sure.
Like what are some of the tools and techniques that you have found for yourself that get you into a place where you even, let's just say, like have the energy or the life force to...
Yep. So if we really go back to center, right, everything is coming, like all the decisions I make about health, maybe I meditate, they come from feeling, being sensitive to listen and to respond to that listening. So at one point I had the impulse, like I've been meditating every day for the last, 11 years, right? And so, but at one point, impulse, like, this is something you should take on. Okay, do it. All right, now I'm in it. Oh, I understand the benefit. Okay, connect to that level of integrity that I know that this is part of my path at this moment until I hear otherwise, right? Same thing with the diet, right? Oh, if I'm in a body, I should nurture this body as an expression of gratitude to my life, like just as being connected. And it's not to get dogmatic about the ideas of the diet, but more so that I'm having the intention to be intentional about what I put in my body. And that sensitivity will inform you of what's working and what's not working. Being clear and truthful, to speak honestly, to have that, which is not a conscious thought, oh, I should do this. Because I think the problem that a lot of people run into is they hear someone does certain things. Oh, this person meditates. Then I need to meditate. I need to meditate for an hour. But it's coming from the outside in, which sometimes helps, but you also need to run it through your internal filter out. If you lose that, you've lost your center and things aren't authentic to you, so things can't really take root. And it just becomes this thing that you're doing that you're trying to fulfill that you never feel the fulfillment of. And so with everything, I always tell people, here are suggestions, try it on, but run it through your filter to make sure it's something that is really yours and you can own. So even in the way that people can regurgitate other people's sayings and philosophies, but they don't really understand them, so they can never speak from themselves in an authentic way because they're not discovering. They're just wrote, memorized, in the same. And so everyone's just like, oh, be happy, do this. But no, you're getting lost in the signposts. All these signposts are really just trying to show people where you need to listen to yourself and realize what's working for you and try things on. Listen to it. Be humble. Know that you don't know while you're in that space, but also connect to your deeper inner knowing that when you get the impulse that you must do this or you must stop doing something, that you listen to it and you do it.
I think you said it.
Yeah.
I think it's good. I think that's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Oh, look, and now
It's
like
like
you're yeah, no, it's dark.
It's nighttime.
It's nighttime. Wow, an hour and a half, like on the dot.
Wow.
I mean, I wasn't even attempting that, but that's very specific. I think it's good. I think,
Beautiful.
yeah. Okay. That was amazing. Thank you.
See you guys.
Bye.